Good evening, everybody. Welcome to episode 34 of Radio Europa, Defend Europa's weekly podcast, live every Tuesday evening at 7:30 p.m. GMT. So unfortunately, William is unable to make it this evening, so I'm standing in as your guest host. My name's Laura and I'm in England, and tonight I'm also joined by Darth in Scotland and Henrique in Portugal. Hey guys.
Hey Laura.
Hello.
So before we begin, I'd just like to say hello to any new listeners that may be joining us tonight. Over the weekend, we went from 2,000 subs to 3,000 subs. And I think it was because of the Iconoclast interview. So if that's you, then hello and welcome to the stream. Hopefully we can provide you with some useful information and insight over the next hour. So we've got two topics tonight. So first of all, we're going to speak about the incredibly worrying tweet by Guy Verhofstadt, who is a senior politician in the European Union. He's been tweeting about his desire for a Euro-African economic area. And then we're also going to speak about the winner of the Young European of the Year award. See if you can figure out the plot twist there. So first, before we begin, just a few key news stories from the week. So French President Emmanuel Macron has criticised 17.4 million Brits by labelling Brexit irresponsible and calling it Europe's worst crisis since World War II. He also boasted of his vision of a more centralised and powerful European Union, claiming that he wants to establish a common border force and a European asylum office. So over to Italy, and Deputy Prime Minister and Interior Minister Matteo Salvini gave an absolutely fantastic speech in the EU Parliament this week, where he completely owned Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission. I recommend, if you haven't watched it yet, to go and watch it. I'll see if we can post a link of it in the chat. But he basically detailed the number of fake refugees that Italy have landed over the last few years and the percentage of various crimes that they've committed. And then he also expressed his continuous assertion that he does not want Turkey to become a member of the European Union. Third and final news story of the week, over to Britain, and 9 Pakistani men have been jailed for a total of 132 years for the rape and violent abuse of young girls in Bradford. So it's another grooming gang story that's come out in Britain. Obviously, we've got many. We've got Rotherham, Rochdale, Huddersfield, Oxford, Newcastle, Leeds, and now the Bradford grooming gang scandal as well. So on that note, we're going to move over to the first story of the week. So I think we'll start with Guy Verhofstadt because it's such a serious story. Darth, I'm going to come to you for this, if that's okay. Can you give us an overview of what's going on there?
Certainly I can. So the initial news story hit when Guy Verhofstadt tweeted on the 1st of March. And his tweet was, "Let's create a single Euro-African economic area. It would have an enormous potential that remains untapped. 1.5 billion consumers, 20 trillion in value, able to rival China, #ALDEPAC. So immediately when I saw this tweet, I saw big warning signs over it all. Obviously, the worry is for a while, and I'm sure everybody else has felt the same way, that there's going to be some kind of attempt at a global market, a one world government, and this just seems to be the next step in that movement. So according to the leader of the ALDE group, the European Union and Africa should form a single economic area. It would have, after all, an enormous potential. So there was a meeting between the Eurogroup, which was hosted in Cape Town, South Africa, where many European descendants are being increasingly encroached by the ANC in the country, while most European leaders remain apathetic towards those issues. Nevertheless, Mr. Verhofstadt is there to spread his liberal economic doctrines, trying to forge alliances with alleged liberal parties in Africa. Ultimately, they're trying to make a Schengen zone across Europe and Africa and create one big massive economy, which they can then bring a huge amount of low-skilled, cheap labour into Europe through mass migration. Now, there was an article which I read earlier on, and there's a couple of things which are really worrying. So there's an image on an article which hopefully will get tweeted out, or put on this video, Trans-African corridors. So the Trans-African Highway Network compromises transcontinental road projects in Africa being developed by UNISA, the African Development Bank and the African Union. The total length of the Trans-African highways in the network is 56,683 kilometres. So a map of this, and it shows basically roads and railways covering the entire of the African continent. So some of the stats here, the Cairo to Gaborone, Cape Town, 10,228 kilometres long. The southern half is complete, but crossing the Egyptian-Sudan border by road is still prohibited. So the vehicle ferry on Lake Nasser is used instead. So this is happening now. This isn't something that's being proposed. It's happening now. Over 50% of the network has been paved, though maintenance still remains a problem, and there are still numerous missing links in the network where tracks are impassable. So once this is completed, and right now obviously there's areas where it is fully functional, you're going to have an enormous amount of people being able to travel quickly. And where are they going to travel but to the north of Africa? So this is going to increase mass migration by a huge amount if this proposal ends up coming into being. So potentially 1.5 billion consumers and people able to potentially move into Europe. Now, the last I heard, we had 700 million people in Europe. How on earth can we afford or be able to take another 2, 3, 4, 5, 600 million people potentially into the confines of Europe? It's just not going to happen. So I'll stop my rambling for now.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Darth. So there are currently 1.2 billion Africans and around 700 million Europeans. And as Guy Verhofstadt said, this is 1.5 billion consumers. And we all know which way they're going to go. There's not going to be anybody in Europe who lives in Manchester who thinks, do you know what, I'm going to go live in some third world country in Africa. It's going to be the free movement of people, and they're just going to totally flood into Europe, because even though they try to pass it off as an economic area, it does include the free movement of people. So it's just such a terrifying thing. And I've been reading the chat while we've been talking, and somebody said that they're surprised that they've been so open about it and not being stealthy. And I'm completely surprised as well that they think that they can just say this and get away with it. And the language on his tweet is interesting. He says 1.5 billion consumers. That's all they see us as, isn't it? Just consumers. They're not interested in our identity or anything. Henrique, I know that you wrote the article on Defend Europa. Do you have anything to add about this?
Yeah, it's basically what you are saying. All they see is profit and money and so on. They don't give a damn about the European peoples. They say they defend our values. Which values are those anymore? Their values are only of those of profit. I'm sure, Europe is a lot more developed than Africa. European companies will certainly gain a lot from this, but not the people. We will probably see millions of Africans moving in to Europe, like we are seeing already, working in jobs that they can be exploited even more than they are already. Like for half or 1/4 of the wages they pay for Europeans. So it's all about gaining money, taking the resources they can out of Africa, milk everything they want and can from the continent. And it's basically a neoliberal wet dream. They just want profit. They don't care at all about our identity and our peoples in general.
Yeah, and when you just said neoliberal wet dream, the thing that I thought of straight away when I read that tweet was that it's like a Kalergi wet dream, isn't it? And I'm sure all our listeners are familiar with Richard von Coudenhove Kalergi, but he was a Japanese Austrian politician and philosopher. And he wrote a book in, I think it was 1925, called Practical Idealism. And in that book, he described how in the future, individual European ethnicities will be watered down by miscegenation to create a new breed of easy to control, and this is his word, Mongols. mongrels, and he actually described himself as a mongrel because obviously he was mixed race. And I'm sure you've all heard the very famous quote that he wrote in the book where he said, "The man of the future will be of mixed race. Today's races and classes will gradually disappear owing to the vanishing of space, time and prejudice." And I don't think I'm allowed to say the rest on YouTube without us being suspended. And I don't think I'm also allowed to say who he said would rule over us when that happens on YouTube. But I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Yeah, Darth, do you have anything else to add about this story? It's really shocking, isn't it? I can't believe how open they're being.
Oh, and by the way, just to finish, African countries basically asked for independence about, you know, the 1950s, 1960s. You know, they basically were saying that they did not want it to be ruled over by Europeans. They want to be able to self-rule and say what they say what they want and rule over the resources they have, so they could better themselves. Let's suppose they could better themselves. But, you know, it's their countries. They don't want anything to do with us, apparently. And you know, why would they bother? Why would the leaders in Brussels bother to going at Africa again and trying to push for these ideas again, just to keep repeating the same mistakes of history, you know?
Yeah. And actually, every now and again, they kind of let it slip, don't they? So Emmanuel Macron has spoken about this a couple of times. Merkel's in support of it. Obviously, Guy Verhofstadt, I mean, he's an absolute psycho. I don't know how anybody in Britain can campaign for us to stay in the European Union. I think it's just absolutely crazy to have people like that with power making decisions for our countries, because they don't care at all about the things that matter to us. It is all just about money and finance. Darth, any thoughts?
Two things kind of jump to mind. First of all, it was interesting that they had this kind of conference in Cape Town in South Africa. Now, obviously, we know all of the troubles that have been going on, or were going on, and are still going on in South Africa, where the Boer are being not maybe systematically wiped out, but they are being extreme. You know, they are being they are being attacked on a regular basis. There's extreme prejudice against them, and by the sounds of it, nobody country-wise is interested in helping them out. The mainstream media has been almost silent on it, and any attempts to kind of try and push any kind of story out into the mainstream has been met with great skepticism, and oftentimes it's just the usual race baiting, and they deserve it, and you know, they've got to take they've got to take some responsibility for what they did to the South Africans many years ago. So what strikes me is I think that they've had this there because they've seen how little pushback there's been from the European countries, from the countries who'd be able to help, you know, the minority South Africans. And if they are not interested in helping the South Africans in any way, you know, the European Union is going to say, well, we can capitalize on this. So if they're not interested in helping, you know, ex-Europeans or old Europeans, then why should they bother helping themselves? So that's one thing. It kind of says to me that that's one of the reasons why they think there's going to be very little reaction from Europeans. The second thing was what you had mentioned about in that book about the future worker will be mixed race, and that's obviously, I think, the main overall objective is if they can reduce Europe, Africa to a mixed race, there then will be no need for people to identify as French or British or Italian. There'll be no need for that kind of pride of or, you know, pride and identity, because, well, you're mixed race, so what does it matter? You know, you just get in line with everybody else and you work away, and you're now a Euro-African or European, and you're just one big European state or one big Afro-European state, and it doesn't matter where you came from, because ultimately you're part of this massive pan system which you're just a number in, and you will work and you will make us money. So that's kind of the two things that jump out at me with this. Is just it's overall a large scheme to water us down to just be a number.
Yeah, and let's not forget that the average IQ in Europe is around 100, and the average IQ in Africa is around 80. And they're talking about, having consumers. Well, people with an average IQ between those two numbers make better consumers than people with higher IQs. So, I mean, I just think it's all very kind of just awful, to be honest, the things that are going on. I'm not sure I'm going too far on YouTube talking about IQ. But somebody in the chat mentioned Sarkozy, who was obviously a leader of France. I think he was he the president before Francois Hollande? So two presidents ago, I believe. Correct me if I've got that wrong. But he actually gave a very famous speech as well, where he said, what is going to be very controversial. The goal is to meet the challenge of racial mixing, that faces us in the 21st century. It's not a choice, it's an obligation, it's imperative, we cannot do otherwise. So, let's not pretend that what's happening with our demographics today is just an accident. This is something that our leaders know about and are also facilitating. And obviously as well, we all know that the replacement migration has been planned out by the European Union. I think they took it down from their website, but everyone screenshotted it, so I'm sure we can get an image if anybody wants to see that. But they're saying that we have an ageing population, so we need migrants to build up our population anyway. But the thing is that our populations are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's just becoming too packed. So,
but also remember that we need to have less children for climate change purposes.
Yeah. So if you're white, then you need to save the environment by having less children. But then we need immigration to help lift our figures up because we're not having enough children. It's just ridiculous.
While Africans have about 4 to 5 kids or even more.
Yeah. So their fertility rates in some of the countries in Africa, it can be 5, 6, 7, 8 children per woman, and it does gradually drop as those African people come to Europe because they kind of merge with the current surroundings, but it doesn't drop below replacement level. It does stay very high, and ours is just too low in Europe. So it is just demographic replacement.
They're probably directing those articles towards the wrong people. Am I right?
What's that? Sorry.
They should be directing those articles towards Africans and not Europeans, probably.
Yeah. And even if we look at all the problems with the environment, like 7 major rivers or something in India and China, like 90% of pollution is coming from those places anyway. So, like me turning my hairdryer off when I dry my hair isn't going to make much of a difference when you've got this mass scale pollution that's going on in non-European countries. So, do you guys have anything else to add about this topic? Obviously, at Defend Europa, we're going to keep reporting on it and we'll produce more articles as more news becomes available. But do you guys have anything else to add, or should we move on to the Young European of the Year award?
One thing I would say is with what's going on, I know we're not really discussing it tonight, but you've got Article 13. I believe there's been some kind of report that the vote is being moved up a week to get ahead of the mass protest plan against Article 13. And ultimately this is going to then prevent any kind of media attention being brought to the fact that the vote's going to go through. If that goes through, you're then going to have less likelihood of protests against this bill of European and Africa getting much closer together, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, they sneak these bills through anyway without even consulting the public half of the time. Look at the UN Migration Pact. We were never really told about it. And then Theresa May and lots of European leaders just went and signed that in secret, didn't they? Enrique, were you going to say something?
Yeah, it's also funny that, this guy Verhofstadt tried to push for liberalism in Africa, supposedly the doctrine that pushes for economic independence when black people are usually the ones who depend the most on welfare here in Europe and even the United States. It's the same pattern everywhere. So we all know who would be paying for this massive economic zone. It will be us anyway. If you care about so much of the economy, who would be paying for this. It will be us.
Yeah, I mean, it goes so deep anyway. There's just so much that we're not told about to do with central banks and the amount of money that we owe, and then the more consumers that we have in Europe, the more money that they can borrow, and it's all about finance and consumers with them. So I think on that note, we'll move on to the second topic. So just before we move on to that, if anybody in the chat would fancy liking the stream, it helps with our engagement, and we usually get more views when we have likes and comments on it. So if you wouldn't mind liking the stream and subscribing if you haven't already, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So Henrique, I'm going to come to you for topic number 2, which is the Young European of the Year Award. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, so the Young European of the Year Award, it's an award given by both the European Parliament and the Schwarzkopf Foundation, the shampoo company, those who don't know what it is. It's a prize that usually goes to people around 18 to 28 years old. Started in 1997, which means 22 years ago. And it's for people who have worked in an honorary capacity towards understanding between peoples or European integration. That usual mumbo jumbo about diversity and comprehension, and we're all one human race, but you should be ashamed of being white. And it also has a monetary prize of 5,000 euros. So I don't know who is paying for this, but it's given by the European Parliament as well. So who knows, maybe our tax money is there too. So this year there was a supposed Italian who won the prize, which turns out to be someone from the Middle East, who was very proud to win the award and being representing the country, showing that Europe is all about diversity and comprehension and tolerance towards everything that is non-European. So there is also the prize is very anti-European. Last year there was an actual native British who won the prize, which was Madeleine Kay, which was called the EU Supergirl. And she basically made a very progressive book about it, which was Theresa Maybe in the Brexit land. So you know what this prize is all about. It's all about being lefty. It's all about being multiculturalist. It's all about diversity, etc., etc. 2 years ago, there was an quote-unquote Belgian, which is from African origin. I think it's Congolese. I will pronounce this very badly, but Nozwine, this is so hard to pronounce. Wait a second. Nozwizwe Duve. It's an African name. And basically, she's a blogger. It's also all about Black empowerment. She has articles like it's not because Black Panther is there that the fight about diversity in the media stops. All sorts of social justice warrior and cultural Marxist stuff. So this prize is not about being European at all. It's all about just being a lefty and celebrating that.
Yeah, I don't think they'd ever give it to somebody like us, would they? I don't think we'd ever win Young Europeans of the Year awards. But the English girl, what's her name? Madeleine Kay. She's the one that she's the EU Supergirl, isn't she? The one with the blue in her hair that's always walking around with a guitar singing songs. Henrique, is that who that is? Do you know?
Yes, exactly. She has been interviewed by BBC, by Daily Politics, BBC4, Reuters. All the mainstream media. She's a media darling.
Yeah, I love her.
Yeah, everybody in the lefty circle loves her, and she's very talented according to her, especially after her anti-Brexit book. You know, the title is pretty revealing itself. You know, Theresa may be Brexit land. So, you know, it's all about being the resistance and being against the establishment when they're clearly part of the establishment. So,
yeah, exactly. And I actually tweeted something about it, saying that I hope I can follow in her footsteps. You know, the young Asian girl that's just won. I hope I can follow in her footsteps and win Young Japanese Person of the Year award, because that's how ridiculous it is. Because the tweet that she put up, which she's now deleted, she said, as the first Italian to ever be awarded this prize in such a crucial time for our country, I want to share hope and positivity to the future generations. And I'm used to seeing non-British people say that they're British, like, you know, African people saying that they're British. Oh, you've got my tweet up on the screen. But when you see a woman who's clearly South Asian with a hijab on saying that she's Italian, to me that just looks absolutely ridiculous. I mean, Alex that works at Defend Europa is Italian. That isn't Italian, is it? Darth, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, there was actually a very good pushback against her. You know, that is why she deleted the tweet. She was getting a very strong pushback. You know, people are taking back the meaning of words. You know, we are not letting again these foreigners who were born here. It doesn't matter if they were born here or not, but people are taking back the meaning of our nations, of our nationalities. We are not letting them appropriating those words. And, you know, an Italian means a true Italian, not someone from the Middle East. A Frenchman means someone from actually a native French, not someone from Mali or from Senegal. You know, people are really pushing back, and it's really good to see that things are changing right now. That words are getting, despite they trying to take the meaning out of words, we are not letting that to happen. And that tweet of yours was very fun, you know, because if you can be Japanese, anyone else can be, you know, Sudanese. Anyone else from Europe can be from Sudan or from Kenya or from God knows what.
Yeah, well, I was hoping that some lefty would see my tweet and then comment underneath saying, but you're not Japanese, because then I was just going to be like, well, duh, she's not Italian. But nobody bit, unfortunately. By the way, does my microphone sound okay, or is it skipping out?
No, it sounds better now. There was a bit of skipping earlier on, but it sounds better now.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Well, hopefully it's okay. I might have to restart if it keeps playing up. So yeah, I'm going to ask Darth if he has any thoughts, but just before I pass over to him, if anybody has any questions, usually in the second half of the stream, we just take questions from the audience. So if you want to ask anything about any news stories from this week, or anything about Defend Europa, or anything just about me or Henrique or Darth, obviously we're not going to give out personal information, but feel free to ask your questions in the chat. And if you tag DETV in the chat, he will record all the questions and make sure that I read them out. So Darth, can I get your thoughts on the Young European of the Year award?
Yeah, I think it's kind of clearly obvious what is being done here. This has been done solely for, well, what I can see is solely politically correct reasons. You know, how many people in, you know, various European countries have done exceptional things, who are, you know, born here and all their family have grown up in a European country and they're not recognised for it. And I guarantee you, if a European person had won, you know, an ethnic European had won this award, there would have probably been calls of racism and, you know, ignoring people who have just come to this country and who are contributing to the European economy or the country that they're living in. What I find really interesting is what you were talking about with Japan earlier on, is for somebody in Japan to consider you Japanese, I think you have to have both, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, both of your parents have to be ethnically Japanese, have to be born in Japan. You have to be living there, And if you're not from, you know, an ethnically Japanese background, you can never actually attain Japanese citizenship. So they have, you know, extremely stringent rules on who can and cannot be considered Japanese. And, you know, on the opposite hand, you have, you know, passports, you have citizenship being handed out like candy, you know, here in Europe, and it's only going to continue. And it just worries me about how quickly we are going to disappear as a group of people. You know, almost every single European country now is being viewed to be is going to be a minority by the middle to the end of the century, and it's just a fantastically, you know, quick or fantastically short amount of time to show, you know, how long we have existed on this planet for and how long a European people have existed for, and we run the risk of disappearing by the end of the century. And that to me is a really, really sad thing.
Yeah, excuse me, I agree. And it just, I mean, we say it so many times. I'm sure everybody who's listening and you two know this, but it is like, if you're African, then you're genetically African, or if you're Japanese, you're genetically Japanese. But white identities are open to everybody, and people get really, really, really touchy about it and salty if you say that they're not. Actually, I don't want to talk about my Twitter all the time, but I wrote a tweet a couple of days ago as well about David Lammy, because he calls himself British when he's talking about, you know, things that, when he can kind of like get away with getting things for being British. So when he says things like, we fought the Germans or we fought extremism in World War II, he's British. But then when he's talking about the British Empire, he says that he's African. And then he calls himself Caribbean when he's talking about reparations for slavery and stuff. So how can he have three different labels, but then say that he's as British as we are when we only have one label? Do you know what I mean? I just think it just really annoys me. Okay, so do you guys have anything else to add about this topic, or should we move on to the questions?
Yeah, basically, they are allowed to do this because our leaders and our elites basically let them do this for the past, 50, 60 years. They have a free pass to do this. We have to push for if we ever win in the future, we have to push for legislation to just allow for the law of jus sanguinis, which is just based on bloods that you have your nationality, because this nonsense in Europe of giving nationality away just because you are born here, it's completely nonsensical in countries that are century old of traditions and cultures and so on. They cannot appropriate our identities like this.
Yeah, and I remember back when I was a kid, and if somebody, say for example, if you watched a historical TV show and there was maybe one black guy, fighting in the Roman army or whatever, nobody cared, because we knew that it was just, it wasn't accurate because they weren't, but nobody cared because we knew that it wasn't being pushed as an agenda on purpose. But now when they're replacing like major historical figures, it's worse when it's non-fiction characters, I think, and just changing them into Africans and Pakistanis and everything. And there's a clear agenda when they do it. People are just having it happen to them so much. It is like pretty much every day that you see a new TV show, isn't it, or a new book or something, or a new film where they replace a white person with a non-white person. People are just getting so sick of it, and they're just starting to respond all the time. So I think we'll go on to the questions then, unless you guys have anything else to add.
Can I just say one thing on this?
Of course.
I think that there's clearly obvious signs that pushback does have an effect, and the European people are less likely to push back right now because of the fear of being branded as racist, and anything that can be considered to be racist or Islamophobic or anything like that. You can run into trouble with the law. But I don't know whether you guys saw, there was an article mentioned today. I think it was a school in Birmingham had begun to teach LGBT issues in the primary school, and around 400 parents who are of majority of Muslim background protested against the teaching of this, and the school backed down and they removed the LGBT curriculum, they removed the LGBT teachings from the curriculum. So it just shows that if you have a group of people who shout loud enough, something will be done. And I think obviously in this case they were terrified of being branded as Islamophobic, so they had to remove this from the curriculum. But I don't know whether there are enough people in Europe to kind of push back against these kind of things and stop them from happening.
Yeah, that's true. And Darth, actually, I'm going to come to you with the first question because you're Scottish. So Pyramid Builder Junior asks, what are some decent Scottish nationalists group? Do you know of any?
I don't know of many right now. There's a branch of Generation Identity is in Scotland. I don't think they are as active as down south. Unfortunately, I don't know many in the Scottish area. That may be a bad rep on me alone. There certainly isn't too much that happens in the Scottish area right now. There are a lot of push for LGBT movements in Glasgow. The SNP are very much pushing for these kind of things to take place. So unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot. And obviously the police are very anti-identitarian movements both here and down south. So there's not a lot of movement happening up here that I can see.
Okay. And while you're speaking, there's another question about Scotland, so I might as well send that one to you as well. Will Scotland split from Britain when Brexit happens? And if they will, should they split? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, 4 years ago when we had the referendum, I will run the risk of being ran out of the chat here. I didn't know whether to vote leave or vote remain during that referendum, and I ended up flipping several coins, left it to chance, and then because I couldn't decide whether I wanted to vote yes or no, and I ended up voting yes to leave the UK. However, now I certainly would not leave the UK after seeing the disaster of what would appear to have happened if Scotland had left. Nicola Sturgeon has been very vocal that if the UK leaves the EU, she will petition for a second referendum, because she wants, and the SNP want, for Scotland to be part of the European Union, which ultimately I can't understand, because the logic is they want to leave the UK because they don't have enough independence over their own finances and their own decisions and laws that they can make in their country, and they then want to join a larger body which will probably have more control or demand more control over their finances and their laws. So I don't understand the logic that they have behind, wanting to leave the UK to then rejoin the European Union. Ultimately, no, I don't think Scotland should leave the UK, and I don't think it would be a good idea if they did. But we'll need to see what happens. She obviously has to get permission to have a second referendum. I think if there was any chance of Jeremy Corbyn getting into power as Prime Minister, I reckon Nicola Sturgeon would offer to support him in a government on the agreement that she gets a second referendum. So we'll watch this space.
Yeah, and it is such a turbulent time at the moment. Obviously I was, I'm not that old, but I don't remember a more turbulent time in my life, really. There is a question from Crusader 717 as well about Ireland, and I'm not sure what direction they're going to go in, because obviously Ireland and Scotland voted to remain in the EU, didn't they? But England and Wales voted to leave. So we, as the United Kingdom, we're leaving, or supposedly we're leaving. So I'm not sure what will happen with Ireland as well, because my housemate is Irish, and he's furious that we have to leave the European Union. It's all about the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. But I wouldn't be surprised if we do see big changes over the next few years. But yeah, we'll just have to keep an eye on it. So a question for Henrique from Amor Patria. I think I've pronounced that right. What do you think will happen after the European elections? Are there going to be any concrete changes? So the European elections are coming up on the I think it's the 26th of May. Henrique, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that the nationalists will make a lot of gains in these elections. It will probably be a major gains over these elections, but I don't think that it will be enough just yet to change things. It will probably force the establishment parties to make some more unlikely coalitions, but I don't think there will be any changes. Also, we have also to take in account that there are some nationalist parties in other European groups. The European Parliament is divided among many groups: the socialists, the neoliberals, which is where the Guy Verhofstadt is, the Greens, all sorts of European groups. And there are some quite nationalist parties in other groups that is not on the group of Europe of Nations. For example, Orban Party is in EPP, which is the Eurogroup that tried to move the Article 13 voting earlier this week, because it wants to vote out before the process. So there's a lot of nationalist parties in other groups. We don't know if they will make some sort of reconfigure of the whole thing. But I don't think that will be enough to change things in Brussels or European-wide level right now.
Okay, interesting. So, Pyramid Builder Jr., will you protest David Lammy? Well, I absolutely despise David Lammy. I think he needs to go back to Guyana, where his parents came from, because he's just the most ungrateful person that we have in the entire country. He makes me so angry. He's just smug. He's an opportunist, and he's not thankful for the British for taking in his family. I mean, I could sit and rant about him all night. I'm not going to moan about him for too long. But I did make a video called The Problem with David Lammy, where I just put all his embarrassing moments together. So that's on my personal YouTube channel if anybody wants to go and check that out. So VIJK, there is a major black figure in the TV series Les Miserables. I haven't seen the TV series. Have either of you two seen that?
No, I haven't.
I'm not sure what channel it's on. No, but it doesn't surprise me. Like I said, they're just replacing everybody with Africans on TV. I think they want you to get used to seeing them so that.
Well, I saw a proposal. There was, I think it was on Twitter. There was some kind of suggestion: should we remaster old films? Old films, and have more minority actors in the films. To make it more diverse. So this is not going to stop. Everything that can be viewed as too white, too straight, too nothing will be left alone. In the name of diversity, in my opinion.
But why don't they
and also interracial.
Sorry, go on, Henry.
Also interracial marketing, interracials. You can see all over. Interracial couples are such a small percentage of the population still, and you see all over the billboards in TV and so on.
Yeah. And you would think that if the billboards were replicable of real life, you would think that like every single relationship in Britain is a sub-Saharan African and a blonde woman, because that's what you see on TV all the time. But actually, if you look at the official statistics from relationships in Britain, 96% of white British people date other white British people. And in Britain, white British people, I'm using their terminology, by the way, I know the phrase white British is annoying, but white British people are the least likely group in Britain to race mix. But despite that, that's a group that's all over the TV adverts and stuff, isn't it? So let me just get the next question. Did you watch Mark Collette's stream about Kaelan Robertson? Sorry about the drama question, but do you think he's right to condemn Lauren Southern? She claims to have had zero involvement with Hope Not Hate. Did either of you two watch that stream?
No, I didn't. I did see, obviously, Tommy Robinson's video when he stung BBC Panorama, and he obviously was speaking with Kaelin, and obviously Hope Not Hate were, I think, threatening him, and or allegedly threatening him and one of the other boys who was involved with Tommy Robinson. But I didn't see that stream in regard to him.
Yeah, I didn't either. I just saw, a recent piece of Kaelin Robertson, saying that he was regretful of some Islamophobic things that he said. Just I don't know. It doesn't seem someone very to be trustworthy, who backtracks on his words. So.
Yeah, well, I like Mark. He's a friend of mine, and I think he's a good lad. And I think that his intentions were obviously honourable there, because if you're having contact with Hope Not Hate, I just think it's such a dangerous, silly thing to do. I don't think you should be going, and even if you think that you can get the better of them, to try and kind of get some information out of them or play them at their own game, I just don't think it's a wise thing to do. And I've never been contacted by Hope Not Hate, but I've been contacted by the BBC and Vice before, and I've just cut them off straight away and said that I'm not speaking to them. I'm not going to go meet with them. So I think that Lauren Southern's a good person. I don't have any concerns with her, but I just think it's an incredibly stupid thing to do, because even if you think that you're on top of the game, like, they're professionals, and this is what they do full time. They just connive and lie and make up information about people. So I just don't think that people should be spending time with them at all, even if it's just as friends, because they're just not good people at all.
And their main focus is to root out Nazis and root out white supremacists, and they don't care how they do it. That is their main goal. There's no hope. It's that they hate everything about people who disagree with their political points of view, and they will do whatever they can to expose these people. So unless you've got nothing to lose, maybe not nothing to lose, but folk like Tommy Robinson, who have lost so much, as far as he's concerned, there's nothing that they can say or do to him which is going to make him seem any worse, which is why he's taken such a strong stance against them. But for people who, have something to lose, or who they can potentially cause a lot of damage to, it's a lot more dangerous for them to try and take this organisation on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So next question. Question for Henrique. What's your opinion on the Eurosceptic rise inside the European Parliament?
So yeah, as I said, they will make some games. We don't know how big those games will be. It will probably make an upset in Brussels. Expect a lot of media and newspapers freaking out on the 27th of May. It will be very interesting, because we don't know. The polls are always changing. We don't know how big those games will be, but it will certainly play a very role, and will probably force some bureaucrats to change tune. But overall, the establishment will remain the same. That whole sort of open borders, diversity. Everyone who wants is European. It will be very interesting to see how they react towards these games. We have to wait and see. And actually, I invite every continental European. I don't know if British people will be taking any part since that whole Brexit thing. But I invite every European person who is able to vote to join in on these elections and take a part on saying that we do not want these crazy measures of open borders with the rest of the world, and crazy liberalism, ultra-liberalism. We should make our voice heard on the 26th of May.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if you're not subscribed to Defend Europa's Twitter account, if you go give us a follow on there, we'll be following the European Parliament elections very, very closely, and it will be honest, truthful information, not like the kind of stuff that you'll get in the mainstream media. So next question from Pyramid Builder Junior. It's all gossip questions tonight. Do you like Mark Collette? If not, why? I personally do. Well, I personally do as well. I think Mark Collette's lovely. Do you guys know Mark Collette?
I've never spoke with him. I've obviously seen a bit of, you know, I follow him on Twitter, that kind of thing, but I don't. I've never had any kind of conversation with him.
Yeah, well, he's a great guy, and check out his show this week on the Alt-Right, which is on tomorrow. Actually, I think it's on between 7 and 9 on a Wednesday evening, and it's a great show. Yes, we're Team Mark Collette on this channel. Henrik is the hottest boy in the world. Thank you for that.
Oh, come on. Don't make me blush.
Don't give him a bigger head than he already has.
That's written by Iman.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Iman. Have we got any more questions? Thoughts on Gab's dissenter platform? Good idea, but implemented the wrong way. That's by Mark Jones. Well, actually, people have been commenting on my YouTube videos asking me if I have dissenter, but I'm not 100% sure what it is. Do you guys know what it is?
Yeah, it's basically Gab. It's an extension of Gab. They set this up, and it's effectively, it creates the ability for you to be able to comment on any website. So obviously most kind of mainstream media sites have now removed the comment section on their website. So Dissenter allows you to comment on that article or that website. Now, obviously, most people right now are not going to see it because you need to have a Gab account. But for everybody who wants to comment and talk about it, who has Dissenter, is obviously going to see these kind of things. So as Gab may potentially grow, you're going to have a larger amount of influence in people being able to comment on these articles. So I personally think it is a good thing, but obviously it's Gab is still so small compared to some of the other large social media companies that there's much less of an impact for this tool. But I personally think it's a really cool tool.
Okay, Henrik, are you familiar with Dissenter or
Yeah, I think it sort of opens a bit of a Pandora box, doesn't it? Because, you know, basically people now can freely say anything they want about a piece of news that used to be censored, you know. The only problem, like Dart was saying, is that Gab is still a very relatively small social network account, and you know, it still needs a lot of growth for those comments to be noticeable, but I think it's a very good thing.
Okay, well, I'm definitely going to have to check that out then, because people do keep mentioning it on my underneath my YouTube videos. So yeah, we'll check that out, and maybe we can talk about it on the next stream. So very, very important question by Boris: Yorkshire pudding or fish and chips? What do you two think?
Well, you're going to hate me, but you probably know the answer to this. I much prefer fish and chips, albeit Yorkshire puddings are very nice. You can't beat a good fish supper.
How dare you?
Well, I'm Portuguese, so I will always go for the fish. So, you know, fish and chips.
Good man.
Oh, so it's 2 against 1. Well, I'm from Yorkshire, so I have to say Yorkshire puddings, don't I? Okay, so we've had quite a few questions about civic nationalism as well. So, I mean, this is a huge topic that we could talk about all night. And I've seen that Millennial Woz is in the chat. Hey, Woz. And Woz and I did a stream actually with Morgoth and Duke of Durham on No White Guilt's YouTube channel. It was called British Blood. And we just kind of dismantled civic nationalism for about 2 hours. It's a really, really good stream. Go and check it out. But yeah, obviously we don't support civic nationalism at Defend Europa. And you can get into arguments, in fact, so many arguments about IQ and whether these immigrants are good for GDP or stuff like that. But at the end of the day, none of that matters, because why should we have to explain that we don't want to be a minority in our own country? Why should we have to put forward an argument for that? Because nobody else has to put forward an argument for that. So I don't even think it's about the culture or what immigrants bring to the country. I just think that we deserve a home. So I don't support civic nationalism at all. Do you guys have any thoughts?
Yeah, so civic nationalism used to be useful in the time of the colonies. You know, it's a very French thing that, you know, and also Portuguese, you know, they kept that whole civic nationalist thing in order to keep the colonies. You know, all those people in Africa are French, or all those people in Asia are British citizens. You know, it's a form of thinking that those colonies were an extension of a nation, a sort of excuse for colonialism. You know, they could identify as a British, even though they were thousands of miles away from Britain and never step a foot in Britain. You know, it was very useful at the time in order to you know, sort of assimilate those kind of people. You know, nowadays civic nationalism is completely useless. You know, civic nationalism without the colonies, like many old time fascists from Italy, from France, from Portugal, and even Spain do it. It's completely obsolete, completely old and useless, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Dath, do you have any thoughts on, I think one of the actual questions that we got was, can civic nationalists be allies to us? Do you have any thoughts on that?
My views have changed over the last few years. I wasn't really too bothered about this kind of thing when, you know, even 3 or 4 years ago. The biggest thing for me is it's become obvious, it's been pushed in our face about this, you know, we must integrate, you know, we must allow our identity to be altered for the sake of political correctness. And when I started seeing that, that's what really started to kind of change my mind. I've got family who have red hair. And, you know, little simple things like that. If we allow our identity to be changed and we become a minority in our own country, you have little things like red hair, green eyes, things like that, which will, you know, disappear. Things that you're not going to see in large parts of the world. And I just see so much of identity and culture to be so precious, and there is a clear attempt to remove that from Western Europe, especially, and from the mainland Europe and the west of the world. You know, there seems to be this ultimate hatred of what has been built here, and I see no good coming from removing it from society. So my views are constantly changing. I'm open to having my views challenged, but for me, it's just an alarming thing of how quickly the demographics in our countries are changing before our eyes.
Yeah, but I do think that one thing that we need to be aware of, because some people are really kind of hateful towards civic nationalists, and it is irritating. I do stand with you on that, but they're kind of like our target audience, because they're only one step to the left of us, really. So if we can convince them that you know, it's just a stupid ideology, then they're closer to us than, you know, pulling people from the centre right, or people who are just like extremely pro-capitalist or turning point people. So I think that we should try to work with them to bring them over to our ideas. And I actually have quite a lot of civic nationalist followers on my on my YouTube account, because I was on the Iconoclasts channel on Saturday. And I've been getting a lot of comments under my videos from civic nationalists saying, I'm not an ethno-nationalist yet, but I like your videos. So yeah, I think hopefully we can bring those people over. And I think, in fact, Woz wrote in the comments that he thinks it has a few years left and then it's over. And I completely agree. I think as the demographics get lower and lower and lower, I don't think that all of these people are happy with us becoming a minority in our own country. I think they're just saying that at the moment because we're like 87%, or at least we were in 2011. So I would hope that as it drops, they say, okay, enough's enough now, and they come over to join us. So two final comments, or one comment and one question. So from VIJK, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, sorry, so I'm just going to spell it out. Just a comment, you should have Millennial Woz on the show sometime. Well, Woz is always welcome to join us on the show. He's a very busy man, but yeah, he's always welcome to join us, of course. And then the last question, which I'll direct to you, Henrique. This is a very good question from Crusader717. What, if any, country in the EU do you think will lead the way to nationalism?
Well, that's a very interesting question. There's been, we've seen very, very strong ethno-nationalist points of talking in Hungary. Orban is probably the best person representing those our points of view. He wants for Hungarians to have native Hungarians to have more children. He stands for his country's borders. Let's remember that in 2015, he erected that fence in order to protect Hungary's borders from all that migrant crisis. And then we have seen some countries slowly joining in. Austria also changed governments. Then there was also Italy. The Visegrad Group, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary in general, they are usually much more nationalistic. Some are more pro-civic nationalistic than others, but especially in Eastern Europe, I think it's our best hope that those feelings spread out towards Western Europe. But I think that it should be a gradual thing, from east to west. We are seeing a lot of interesting things going on in France and in Spain too with Vox. Sure, they are civic nationalists, like they are saying, but I do agree with Laura that civic nationalists are a good intermediate point as a way of transforming a sort of society basis in order to achieve ethno-nationalism. But it will probably be a gradual thing from east to west.
Yeah, Darth, do you have any thoughts on which countries leading the way in Europe at the moment?
Well, the impression I get is that the nationalist movement is certainly moving from east to western Europe. Obviously, the countries like Hungary with Orban, Austria, like what's already been said. There's very much a sense of national pride in Eastern Europe, and I don't know if that's something to do with what happened with coming out of the Soviet Union, and the Western Europe never really experienced that kind of thing. But I think definitely it's coming from the east, and obviously the movement of mass migration into Western Europe is definitely speeding up the process of people saying no, enough is enough. So I don't know exactly what country is gonna lead it, but I would definitely say from Eastern Europe. And what was said about civic nationalism, and my view is the left are so intolerant that any opinion which deviates from their insanely politically correct agenda has to be thrown on the fire, for want of a better phrase. It has to be burned. And for people to adopt that same view and say anything which doesn't fit my opinion, I can't talk to them, I can't speak to them. And if people adopt the same agenda and the same viewpoints that the left have, I don't think you're going to ever make any progress. So obviously you can disagree with people and say I personally think you're wrong, but if you adopt this kind of view that the left have, I don't think you're ever going to make any progress in the movement which is obviously growing.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, what you said. I think that what do you guys think of Salvini? Do you think, I know that people, whenever somebody praises him, people mention that he visited Israel and that he stood that time with the Israel flag. And I'm not sure if we underestimate him a little bit. He's doing some fantastic things. He's cut illegal immigration down by 95% in a single year. And the speech that I mentioned earlier when I did the news at the start of the show, he actually, when he said that he didn't want Turkey to join the European Union, he mentioned the Armenian genocide, and he said that was the first Holocaust, but nobody cares about the victims. And he said because you have level A Holocaust victims and level B Holocaust victims. So he was basically like, that is, can you imagine any other politician saying that? He's got balls, definitely. What do you two think of Salvini?
He's certainly much braver than most of the politicians in Europe. Definitely braver than any politician probably in the UK. It's very refreshing to see him have an opinion and stick by it, and and not be bullied into ultimately adopting opinion because his political career depends on it. I would say his approach is very, very refreshing and good to see. And I think we need more politicians of that kind of caliber, regardless of ultimately what side of the line you go on. I think to have a view and to stick by it like that, and to argue your case and not bow down to politically correct pressure is very admirable.
Yeah, he definitely stands by his ground. He shook a lot of things in Italy. Italy was facing a very tough migrant crisis coming from Libya, and he closed the ports. All the migrants are virtually almost non-existent in Italy, and that left a lot of people in Brussels angry. He certainly is not as naive as he thinks, as you were saying about Israel war. And he also talks about things like liking being with his own people. I also made an article about Eurovision, and it shows basically an Italian candidate that he wanted instead of the Egyptian one that had all those sort of modernist things. So he likes very much his culture and his people, and stands by it. So it definitely is a game changer in the country and in Europe in general. He is a good example, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the speech that he made this morning, I'm going on about it again, aren't I? But he started the speech by saying something like, "As an Italian and as a father, I am worried about this." And like other politicians, they would never say that. Like, look at Theresa May and compare her to Salvini. We can pick fault at Salvini and say that he's not perfect because he's not, but I would swap him for Theresa May in an absolute heartbeat.
and on what you just said there, Salvini says, as a father, how many other mainstream, politicians in the EU, the EU countries have kids? Rhyme them off. You've got France, Germany, UK, Scotland, or I'm saying the UK, England, Scotland, the leaders of these countries don't have children. They do not have stake in this game. They don't care ultimately what happens in the future because they don't have children in which will be affected by their policies.
Because politicians with children have to ensure a good future for their kids and their country, their future, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up. Just a very quick question from Zero. He asked me what my thoughts on Margaret Thatcher were. Well, I'm a working class northerner, so I despise Thatcher. She sold all our industries and shipped them abroad, and all of my family, my grandparents and uncles and stuff lost their jobs. So as a working class northerner, I'm afraid I'm not a fan of Thatcher. I'm not sure what you guys think about that. But yeah, okay, we're going to wrap the stream up. So I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope you all found the information interesting and insightful. If you could like the stream, that would be brilliant, and it would help us a lot. Also, if you want to support Defend Europe, there are a number of ways that you can do that. PayPal, Bitcoin and Streamlabs, and all the information is in the description below the stream. So yeah, I think that's it. We'll call it a day. Do you guys have anything else to add before we say goodbye? No?
Thanks very much for everybody listening.
Yeah.
Okay, well thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next week, Tuesday evening at 7:30 GMT. Bye guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.